Hello, my name is Matthew McKnight. I am a programming mentor with Team 4536 The Minibots, and today we're going to take a quick look at Git and integrating Git into Visual Studio Code with some extensions to make our lives easier. The two that we're going to use here is Git Graph, which is a great graphical user interface displaying how branches are laid out, and Git Config User Profiles, which allows you to easily switch between profiles on a single machine. And since we share laptops, that's going to be pretty important. The process by which we do Gits is fairly straightforward. So I'll demonstrate. You're going to write the code, you're going to build it to make sure there's no compile errors, and then you're going to commit it, but not push it up to GitHub. And you just keep doing this until you reach a good stopping point, a milestone commit. Then we're going to roll it back while keeping the changes made to the files and make one large commit of all the things we've done. And then we're going to push that up to GitHub. So let's get started. You can see how this works. To install the extensions, you go to View and Extensions, and then you can search for the Git Graph in this case. I select Git Graph and I choose to install, and it's installed. You can ignore that. That's just a bad cut. So now Git Graph is installed, and then we're going to go up here and we're going to search for Git Config. It's not going to be at the top. It'll probably be like the sixth one down. There it is. So you select Git Config User Profile and you install that as well. And like I said, the Git Graph is a great UI, and the Git Config allows us to flip back and forth between different profiles. And we'll do that now so you can see how that works. If you close this out and you look down at the bottom right of the screen, first thing we're going to do is we're going to log out of I am Batman. You don't need that anymore because we're actually going to be using Git Config. So we're going to actually go down to the bottom right. If I click on where it now says I am Batman in the bottom right, which is what Git Config is showing, and I actually try to pick a profile, which is what I would normally do, I'm going to discover that bbatman has not been set up yet. Not an issue. Hit Escape. Go down there again and you click on Create New, which is actually on the right, and put in your name. In this case, I'm just going to put bbatman. And then you have to put in your username for GitHub. b-batman is my username. And your email address, which is myorangeeyes@outlook.com. So whatever you're using, that would be what you would use. You hit Enter, it will create the profile. And now when we click down there and choose Pick a Profile, we'll have the option to select bbatman. Now notice there's still an exclamation point on the right if you look closely. That's because it hasn't been applied. So if you click on that and choose Yes Apply, it will actually apply it to the Git Config and we'll be ready to rock and to roll. Alright, now that we have switched over to bbatman, what we're going to do is we're actually going to start writing the code. And I'm going to go through this with you. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go over and change from master. I clicked on the bottom left. I'm going to create a new branch because you don't want to write in master. I'm just going to call my new branch mm-github demo, and then my initials and the one I'm going to be working on. And then in the bottom left, I'm going to click on that little cloud icon, which allows it to publish. That'll actually push it up into GitHub. If you go to GitHub, we're actually going to see it in there. So over here, if I hit refresh, you'll now see that there is a new branch, mm-github demo, in our remote repository. That's the one I'm going to be working on. And it is published by I am Batman, which seems strange, but that's because master was by I am Batman. Until I make a change, it's not going to record that I've made any change. So let's make a change. If I right-click in Subsystems and I choose New File and I type in drivetrain.java, that's definitely a change. And then I'm also going to put in that it extends subsystem base. This probably shouldn't be new to most anyone here. But now pay attention to what I'm going to do. I'm going to right-click on the Build Gradle in the left, and I'm going to choose Build Robot Code. And what that's going to do is it's going to try to create the code as if it were going to be launched onto the robot. So if there are any compile time errors, anything that is wrong, I'm missing a semicolon, it'll catch it. Notice the build successful there. That means that I can commit this without any concerns. So I'm going to stage it by clicking on that left, and then I'm going to type in my commit message. What I did was I created drivetrain.java. and I extended the subsystem base. And then I'm going to go up to that check marks, and I'm going to check that. I'm going to push that, and it's going to commit it locally. Now I have an option to push it up. Is that sync change? I have an option to push it up to GitHub, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to continue working. I'm going to create a private differential drive class level variable. I'm going to call it m_differential drive. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to go down here. I'm going to right click on build Gradle. I'm going to build robot code to make sure everything is fine. It's going to return a happy build successful in just a moment. And then I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to go over here on the left of source code, and I'm going to enter in a commit message, add differential drive, class level variable stuff. And notice that when I click on the check mark at the top, it'll actually ask me if I want to commit all files, even those that are unstaged. I'm going to say yes. That's just a shortcut. I could have staged it. Now I could sync 2 changes up to GitHub, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go back and I'm going to continue writing another commit. The key when you're working is that you commit often. You commit often, but you don't necessarily push often. So commit often, push less often is one way to put it. So I'm going to, and you'll see in a moment why that is. So I'm going to add to can spark max the left front drive motor and the right front drive motor. And I'm going to throw them out there with some numbers. The motor type is going to be K-brushed because I talked to the build team and that's what they said. And once I get both the left front drive motor and the right front drive motor instantiated in drivetrain's instantiation code, then you can probably guess what I'm going to do after that. I'm going to go over, obviously, and I'm going to do another build because I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. The idea is to be able to push code that doesn't break. And that's why you do these little changes, because you can check on a regular basis. And if there's an issue, you can fix it quickly before you go on. You don't want to be half an hour into writing code and discover that there's a problem that you have to spend another half hour trying to dig out. So you commit quickly. I'm going to put another commit message here. And my commit message is going to be pretty straightforward. This will what? Add 2 drive motors to drivetrain.drive. All right. So now I've committed that. We're going to take... through the magic of video editing, I'm going to whip through 4 more commits. So right now I have 3 commits waiting. I'm going to do 4 more commits to sort of get the drivetrain to sort of a set point, a place where I can push it as a whole. And that is in the case where I've actually gone through the process and created the differential drive. But before we get too much farther, I want to click up in that little icon you see in the source control. And let's look at Git Graph so you can kind of see why it's a very nice sort of layout. It's showing all the branches that exist. We are the blue branch, and we are GitHub demo. At the very top, you can see because there's nothing in front of it, there's no origin slash, this is our local repository. If you click on the commit I've just made, which is add differential drive to var to drivetrain, on the right you can actually click on the files that have been modified, and it will show you a side-by-side comparison. The one on the left was the one before, and the one on the right is actually the changes I've made. So this is a great way to look at these things. Because we haven't pushed it up, the origin is not up to date. So there will actually be on the Git Graph a difference between the local copy and the origin copy. We'll look more at that later, but for right now, I'm going to whip through this in record time. I'm going to do 4 more commits. I'm going to use the constants file. I'm going to update that. I'm going to create motor controllers for right and left. I'm going to assign the motors to them, and then I'm going to create the differential drive. I'm going to invert the motor controllers using the constants to determine which one they are. And every time I do a step like this, I'm going to commit it. I'm going to write, I'm going to build, I'm going to commit. I'm going to write, I'm going to build, I'm going to commit. Because the idea is you want to be able to walk away at any point and have functional code. All right, I'm getting close to the end now. I've created the differential drives, and I've put in the final commit that I want to do except for the inverted. And then once that gets done, we're going to enter back into real time. And there I'm going to go into Git Graph, and I'm going to actually reset it to when we first created GitHub. So I'm going to go all the way back to the before the commit I wanted. I'm going to right click and I'm going to do what's called a soft reset. So here I'm going to say reset current branch, and I'm going to make sure it's soft because then I got to keep all the changes I made. Yes, reset. This is tricky thing, so be careful. Before you do that, check with us. And what you'll notice is now I have one big commit. And the commit is the combination of all the changes I've made, all the changes I've made to constants, and all the changes I've made to drivetrain. So I've taken those 7 commits and I've squashed them into one. And there's probably a better way to do it, and I'll look into doing it for Visual Studio Code. But having done this, I can actually do this as a single commit. And so now I have to figure out how I'm going to do the commit. And when you do commits that are sort of milestone commits, you can actually talk about what you've done to make it. So the overarching overview is that I created drivetrain subsystem with the differential drive. But I'm going to hold shift and hit enter a couple times. And now I'm going to start laying out information about what each step was. Now the initial line, the sort of overview line, can only be 50 characters. And if you go longer, it'll yell at you. Every subsequent line, if you hold shift enter, can be 72 characters. So I'm just lining out here, just for information's sake, if somebody's curious, all the steps that I took to reach this milestone. I created the drivetrain Java, I created the class level variable differential drive, I created 2 CAN/SPARC Max for the left and the right, I then assigned them to the motor controllers. So I'm kind of going through the steps I've done. Now, people will be able to look at the files themselves and they can kind of figure it out, but it's kind of good habit to sort of lay out the steps that you've taken. And you'll see, even though you're putting all this information in, it isn't on display at the high level. You can drill down, however, and take a look. So once I've done that, I've assigned the MCGs to the differential drive. And notice the order is not important because I'm doing them all together. Then I can actually make this commit. And I'll use constants, find a little bit, reference, and I go up, and now I'm going to make the commit, and then I'm going to push it up to GitHub because this is kind of a milestone change. So I make the commit, and notice it's one big commit. And if you look on the left in Git Graph, you'll see that now I have that commit of create drivetrain subsystem with differential drive. And I need to bring the origin GitHub demo up to where I am by synchronizing the change. Now note, all my information that I put in is there. So if somebody was looking at the high-level view and they wanted to drill down and find out what had happened, they could do it. They could go in and see my notes. They could go in, they could look at the changes in the files. They could see who did it. And now I'm going to click on Sync Change, and I'm going to push it up to the GitHub repository. It's going to run through, and if you look on the bottom left, you'll see that twirly thing. And then once it's done, GitHub up in the cloud will have it. And if anybody pulls down GitHub demo, they will have the changes that I made. So the key is I've made them locally, I've pushed them remotely, and that makes other people have the access. There it is. And again, in GitHub, you can actually go into GitHub. If you go down to the contribute and look at compare, it'll let you look at the commits that have taken place. So this is good documentation that you do as you're working on the code. All right, let's go back. I'm going to do one more quick bit here, and I wish it were quick. It's going to probably take another 4 minutes. But basically what I'm planning to do is I'm going to change who I am using git config to I am Batman, and then I'm going to do a code review, which means I'm going to go through the code and see what things need to be cleaned up, if anything. And then I'm going to push it out again, and we'll have 2 commits. One as bbatman, which was that created the differential drivetrain, and the other one will be cleanup of drivetrain. So now bbatman, I right-clicked in the bottom, I chose the profile, I approved it. I'm going to do this, I'm going to make sure I'm in the right branch, and I did the little magic, so on this computer somehow I'm now behind the remote. So the first thing I have to do after I check in with git config, make sure I'm in the right branch, is I have to pull down any changes that exist. So those are sort of your first 3 big steps. Make sure you're checked in as yourself, make sure you're checked in the right branch, and make sure that you've pulled down, by pulling in the bottom left, any changes that have taken place. And you want your branch that you're working on to be the up-to-date branch. So I've done that, it's pulled it down, and now I am up to date with what has been pushed out there by Batman, who I deeply admire. So now I'm going to go into drivetrain and I'm going to start looking at things that need to be cleaned up. So for example, in the constants and the drivetrain, I look at each of them and I decide, well, the drivetrain has these two imports that really aren't needed. They got put in there in the process of coding, and so I'm just going to take those out. I've also noticed that the constants are left front motor ID and right front motor ID, and that's not really explicit enough. I need to know that they're the drive motor IDs. It's possible the drivetrain could have other motors depending on what structure you have, and so I'm actually going to change the constant names there, and then obviously, not since I changed them within drivetrain, I have to pop over to constants and change them as well, because if I run a build, it's going to break. Well, once I change them and save them, you know what I'm going to do next. I'm going to run build robot code because I want to make sure that I'm going to commit functional code. So all this is looking good. All that's fine. I go over, I take out the comments. All right, I think I've done enough cleanup here. I right-click build Gradle, I build robot code, and it whips through it, and it's going to tell me everything is fine. That's beautiful. Now I know I can commit. And so this is kind of, for me, this is like a milestone spot. I've finished what my task is, which is to do the code cleanup. And so once this whips through and tells me that the build is fine, I'm again going to go over to the left and click on the source control. I'm going to put in the message, and my message is pretty straightforward. This will what? This will clean up drivetrain.java. I'm going to hold Shift Enter, go down a couple lines, and I'm going to put in what I did. In case anybody wants to know, I removed unneeded imports, and I changed the x underscore motor ID constant to, got to catch up with my speaking, x underscore drive motor ID. Now, you'll probably figure that out if you look in the code, but it's useful for people to also have it as a record. So I'm going to stage and push that up, and then sync changes, so I commit, and then I'm going to push it up, and it's going to go up there into the cloud. And now, once this is done, if I flip over to my, notice, yes, there it is. I now have it in Git Graph, but I actually want to flip over to GitHub. And when I go over to GitHub, you're going to see that I have, once I refresh, now two commits. One by Batman, one by I am Batman. And that's how we're going to be able to switch back and forth between our configurations pretty easily. So there you have it, a quick overview of two of the extensions we're going to add to Visual Studio Code, Git Graph, kind of how that looks, and Git Config, which enables us to switch back and forth between profiles, and also kind of the process by which you can do commits to GitHub. Now, I want to emphasize, if you feel more comfortable just committing and pushing, do it. There is no rule that you have to squash commits. Especially when you're starting out, it may be better for you to simply do a short, quick commit and then push it up to GitHub and then continue on from there. One of the advantages of doing commits locally is that you can roll them back really easily. Once you commit to GitHub, you can roll back. It's just that it becomes part of the history. So again, if that's a way you want to feel comfortable, then go ahead and do it. I hope you had a great time, and I'll see you soon.